Hello, welcome to the February 2nd, no, what day is it? February 3rd planning meeting. Let's see, let me share our document. I think I'm sharing the right window. Oh, good, that was a little tense. So I wanted to start by just kind of talking about the plan really briefly, because I think I've said it a few times, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. Oh, also let's put, I'm gonna make a better template for this, but for now I'm improvising. So the plan is that every month we will have a planning meeting. We will begin with updates from the active projects, and for now I went through the things that are on the project board. I have some thoughts on how we should handle our active projects, but I'll leave that for later. And then we're going to look at the meetings over the rest of the month and try to schedule what meetings we'll do this month. And then that's it. And I wrote about meeting preparation. This was just a note about, I might just remove this, but I would like us to set up some standards for when we have design meetings, what kind of prep we should do before the meeting, and what the expectations are from people who file the issues, how much do they have to have done, that kind of thing. So let's start with project updates. I expect this to be light this week because I didn't really ping anybody and we're a little bit slow here, but we can go through and do it. For async foundations, I will say a few things. There's continued work on what I would call polish, and like, for example, the problems of we currently have an overly conservative approximation for what lives across a yield, that kind of thing. And Esteban and I have been talking about how to improve that. So there, and then I haven't been following meetings that closely, but I know there's still work there. But another thing that we've been doing a lot of work on in the traits working group that pertains to this is figuring out the groundwork that will take us to async functions in traits. And the current plan, which I have somewhere here, the current plan involves a number of steps along the way, which is, for example, stabilizing a subset of named impl trait, meaning type foo equals impl bar, along with generic associated types, and so forth. So I think it's probably worth a whole design meeting, maybe more than one, to go over it in detail. I'm still kind of putting some of it together, but I'm pretty excited about it because I think this will kind of finish off a bunch of features we've been waiting on for a long time. And I think there's a good path. That plus there's still like stream trait and other traits work. And I've been starting this document, which I'm slowly working on, the async vision document, a work in progress. So this is something I'm experimenting with, the idea being that we don't often have documents that kind of describe what we plan to do over the course of, over a bigger span than like an RFC. We often talk about it, but we rarely write it up, and I'm trying to look at how to do that. So this is meant to describe sort of what we're shooting for with async, not necessarily where we'll get this year, but where we could get in a few years perhaps. And it covers more than just lang team stuff. Like it includes tooling and other kind of issues.
So is the intention bigger than an RFC, smaller than a roadmap?
Yeah, think of it as a roadmap for, sort of like a roadmap for async. Specifically, and not the project overall. Okay, that's all I have to say about async foundations. Any questions or thoughts on that?
I guess one question I might have, I think you mentioned some polish work. It sounded like most of it was in the compiler sort of implementation rather than Lang related. Is there something to call out there that's Lang related?
That's right. I don't think any of it is Lang related. In particular, some of it is sort of Lang intersecting in the sense that there are thorny questions around, well, like take that over approximation issue. There's a bit of a Lang issue in that at some point, if we had a spec, it should define what things get captured. And right now it's kind of implementation defined. And so that's been a bit on my mind because some of the implementation choices we could make there would make it harder in my mind to have a spec, and some make it easier. So it's Lang intersecting in that way, but not in the sense of new Lang features. I will say, I don't have this on my mind, but like part of the vision document would describe things like I think it falls out from some of what I've written in there that we want for loops syntax for streams and stuff like that, which is part of why I'm writing it. It has one of the things that are in it is, I'll just show you, is these design tenets, kind of trying to structure what are the goals that we're doing with async. And so this tenet, for example, I think it kind of falls out from that principle that you should have a way to iterate over streams that feels like a for loop and stuff like that. Similarly, this one. So these are actually pretty, I would love to get, if people have thoughts and feedback on them, like, or want to have a longer discussion about it, I would love to do it and talk it out, because I think my hope is when we establish things like this, it'll help us settle arguments down the line, because we'll be able to refer back to that and say, this is what we're doing because this is the vision we set out. So either we change that or we take this road. There's only those two choices. So const evaluation, or more thoughts on async? Okay, let's move on. Const evaluation, I don't have any idea what's going on here. I think probably nothing new, but I could be wrong. Does anyone have anything to add? Okay. Const generics. So there, I have a little bit here. I mean, min's const generics, did we stabilize this? I don't know.
It's in nightly right now. We'll hit beta in
that's what I
a
thought.
week or so.
So that's awesome. I know that I had some conversations with LCNR recently about setting up a more regular, like, meeting time to start digging into const generics implementation theory issues and so forth, and try to go for the next steps. We haven't managed to schedule that yet, but there's still activity, in short. But it's very much in the implementation phase at the moment. This is pretty exciting, though. There was, no, anyway. In our discussion, I discovered a few things that mildly worried me, but about stuff that we accept that maybe we shouldn't, but I don't remember exactly what it was. And I don't, yeah, I'm not that worried. It was like some corner case things, but we're going to have a little bit of a rocky road settling all this stuff out.
I guess, do you feel like any of it rises to the level where we should consider not stabilizing, or?
I think not. I'm trying to remember. I think I walked out of the meeting with the conclusion that, and I'm trying to pull up my notes now, that it was fine in part because the behavior that was stabilizing was probably the behavior we wanted. It was just a little bit harder to implement than the other one in a more general way, and so we might like it might put a little more work ahead of us, but it's probably what we should be doing anyway. That was my conclusion.
Okay.
I wish I could find the document. I don't remember what that was about. Yeah, denying trailing semicolons. I think this is like a small item. We're kind of waiting for a PR from Aaron Hill. Is that right? Maybe there even is a PR.
I think I've seen some traffic. Yeah. I don't know
Who's
more than. I think Felix I think you were owning this, but I'm not 100%.
that's
I
what I
haven't
was
looked
just
at it.
wondering.
If it's me, I haven't looked at it.
I'm looking at the issue. Okay, the lint was implemented. It's allowed by default. And yeah, Felix seconded this. And the lint actually merged. So I take that back. So I guess the real question is whether we want to move it away from allow by default, and are we done, and who's pushing that forward? It seems like we probably do. Like, what's the point of having it if it's allowed by default? No one will ever look at it.
Is there a reason we're not doing like a feature incompatibility approach here?
I don't know.
Okay, I can look into this.
It is a future compatibility lint. It's just allowed by default. I think because we wanted to assess the impact and decide if the approach was good.
Okay.
I'd love to see a crater run. That's the next obvious step. I haven't looked actually at how the lint works, but a crater run would tell us how much I care to do that. What's up with safe transmute? Who's following along there? Josh, have you been?
I have been. The current state, as far as I can tell, is that there was a whole bunch of back and forth some time ago trying to sort out how do we build a more minimal approach. There was a specific proposal to try to do a more minimal approach, which did get caught in some bike shedding, but that is a side issue. And at this point, I think that there may be some there's two separate issues. There are some objections to the minimal approach, and I think that needed some feedback from the Lang team. I provided a little bit of guidance in that area for what we did and didn't think that the minimal implementation needed to do. This was related to, does the implementation need to implement language level privacy, or can that be built on top of that by the higher level traits that we provide? And then separately from that, I think there's just a high level review needed of take what the current state of the proposal is and review it and make it clear, okay, yeah, this is looking good. We could use some, RFCing in this area. I believe
maybe we want to encourage another design meeting.
I think it might be a good idea for us to follow up by Zulip and have a couple of conversations to confirm that. But then assuming that, yes, a design meeting seems like a good idea.
Okay.
I can do that follow-up.
Yeah. Okay. So pub macro rules, I think Ryan Levick, is he the liaison or the shepherd? I forget, to go back, or both. But in any case, Ryan was pursuing this a little bit with an RFC. I'm supposed to make a proper tracking issue. It needs some minor revision, but Josh mentioned that Petroshenkov closed his PR, which may indicate a lack of communication. Probably indicates we haven't communicated very well with Petroshenkov, which is true.
I think that's likely, yeah.
And because the intention was not to, was to build on that work and not sort of deny that work. But on the other hand, anyway, I'd have to think. I'll ping him and Ryan, I guess, and see what's going on. But I think we're still feeling generally good with this. We want to move. Does the RFC want to be like, is it in pending FCP or anything?
It is not at this point. I think we actually need to do some further review of that RFC. We gave preliminary feedback, and then I think the current state of it is in the Lang team's court.
Yeah, so one of us needs to take that on, I think.
Josh, can you clarify, did we give feedback directly to Ryan or what was the story there?
We gave feedback to Ryan via Zulip, both before and shortly after the RFC was opened, I believe. And I believe that all of that has been incorporated at this point. So I think that the ball is in our court, but we should confirm that.
I think that's right. I don't remember what minor revisions it still needs. I think, yeah. I'm going to take an action item to review the RFC. Let me open up our action item. I gotta start doing some of these. That's okay though, unless I don't know if anyone else wants to do the review. That's also okay with me, but I'd like to see it get into pre-FCP. And I want to read it either way, so.
I guess a quick procedural note, Nico, on the action items, are we deleting those when they get done, or what's the story?
Yeah, you can go ahead and delete them if you, well, I was expecting to delete them in sort of a pre-scan step. I hadn't really thought that through. That's a good
Maybe
question.
checkboxes would be better. I don't know. It's one of those things where like maybe, well, I guess it depends on whether we actually want to track
Let's do
progress.
checkboxes. I'd like to, because I'd like to check in on, for the most part, I'll probably just delete them, but maybe some of them I want to double check that it's done the way we wanted it or something. So let's do this, and people can just check them off when they're when they feel they've completed it. Sound good? Declarative macro repetition counts. I don't know what's happening here. I think there was kind of there was some recent messages like last month or something, and it seemed like it kind of went dead. Maybe we should circle up. And the liaison, who was the liaison, Josh?
The liaison was Locathor, but the issue with this one was that the person who originally proposed to implement this that Locathor was trying to work with and liaise for more or less disappeared.
Okay. Maybe we'll just close it, but let's see. Let's give them a chance. We can ping them and see what their story is. Josh, do you want to do that?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
Clarifying, do you mean pinging Locathor or pinging the person who originally pitched this?
I mean the person who was going to push it over the finish line. The person who pitched it.
Okay.
Let's put that. So, okay, Josh, to ping declarative macro repetition counts. The RFC 2229. So we adopted a new desugaring after our conversation, which solves a lot of problems, but sorry, not desugaring. We adopted a new migration. So instead of doing let x equals x, we're now doing this. And the advantage is that this this doesn't cause let x equals x forced a move of x essentially, which we don't always want, and also had problems with self because you couldn't say let self equals self. None of those problems apply with this new desugaring. However, it's very non-obvious what it's doing, and so we probably want to add some sort of macro or something that's like
just capture
x like this, and that's actually really interesting to me because, you know, it could potentially in the future expand into other things. Like you could imagine something like, I don't know, let's say this that would desugar to like let x equals x dot clone, or, you know, there's different future expansion possibilities that would let us experiment, and maybe eventually it becomes real syntax, or maybe it never does because it's not that important. But that's something that wasn't in the original RFC that I guess we should make up a PR and do an RFC bot merge for it. But
Yeah, one thing I will call out is that the drop and X is probably going to get linted at by Clippy at least, saying that it's useless.
Oh, let's see. Yeah, it's a good point. Macro might help with that too. Okay, no other major updates. We're still doing implementation work there. We have not yet gotten to the tricky trait stuff that we talked about. But so FFI unwind, we had a recent blog post. What is this? Okay, recent blog post about doing long jump work on inside Rust. Nothing's really happened since then.
I have a question actually on that.
there's
Did we
something.
want to potentially recharter or like edit the charter or whatever? Because I think the charter didn't call out that as sort of in scope. It said it was future area, and potentially there's a good idea of, writing up a quick PR to the charter saying, here's the new stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I guess it's a good point to also get feedback on whether anyone thinks this is worthwhile to do. I think it is, but here, I guess this is the blog post. I guess I think it is, but it depends on how much the energy is there from other people to push it along, because I think I don't have a lot of bandwidth for it. And so, but it does seem like an important kind of C parity item to me. But there's some notes in the blog post about, I guess I can do a real quick summary, but I don't want to spend too long on this, so I won't. But I'll say that the blog post includes some notes on what it probably looks like, and it boils down to kind of annotating functions that either might long jump or might call a function which long jumps, which I guess is the same thing, so that you can so that the compiler can check that they don't have destructors in scope and stuff like that. I will say having written code like that is extremely fragile, and it would be very nice to have a compiler check. It's a pain in the butt. Any thoughts on that? Okay.
Is the intention here to handle all of these things in kind of a unified way, or is the intention to say, well, here's how we're handling there are a few different approaches for unwinding, and I'm wondering if there's an intention of is there any desire to interoperate, or is this just let's make sure that we can be unwound across?
If I understand what the question means.
There's two separate potential issues here. The blog post primarily talks about dealing with long jump and allowing Rust frames to be safely unwound if they are plain old frames. There's also the separate issue of actually interoperating with things like C++ exceptions. And I'm wondering if the intention is to try to handle those things this more or less the same way, or to handle them separately, and if so, which one's the priority?
I think they're different. The intent was to handle them separately.
Okay.
Because they behave very differently. I think that's a good question, which one you think would be higher priority. But it seems like we have more people asking for long jump than C++ exceptions, but I'm not sure.
It depends on which set of which group of people that are asking, and I suspect some of the people asking after long jump may potentially be just assuming that all unwinds are unwinds, and what they actually want is to throw exceptions across Rust. We should find out. But long jump is relatively uncommon, except in, some occasional C code that's doing unusual error handling, and needing to do that across Rust is possible and could be done, but it's pretty rare for library code to expect to be able to call something that interoperates with that.
Most people are using it. The only use cases I know of is calling into C libraries that use long jump, like
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Ruby
like
or whatever that
libjpeg or whatever it
libjpeg.
was.
Yeah, there's a few
Right,
specific
exactly.
ones. Yeah.
Right, there are definitely a few of those. I suspect on sheer balance of numbers, there are more people who are going to want to interoperate with C++ exceptions if they realize that's an option. But right now, the people who have been driving FFI Unwind have been more coming from the C library long jump based error handling world. And
Yeah.
we may want to consider the relative priorities of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good
Don't know
question.
either.
I think I somewhat lean towards, unless somebody else wants to pick up this ball, maybe we should just leave it for the moment. But I'll have to think about it, talk about it with Batman AOD. Never type stabilization is kind of stalled out because I haven't gotten back to looking at that new approach, done anything at all, basically. But that's where it is. I don't know about instruction set attribute. Does anyone else? Inline assembly. I think we should be moving to stabilize this.
I think we should as well. We've gotten a number of successful usage reports at this point. We haven't gotten any substantive feedback that suggests there's any critical issue as far as exposing things we don't want to expose or having internal compiler errors like the old implementation did or anything like that. I think at this point we do have enough information that we could reasonably stabilize. I think the one caveat to that is that we should decide, do we want to stabilize the entire ASM mechanism such that any architecture's inline assembly is insta-stable when added, or do we want to stabilize ASM on an arch by arch basis and say, okay, these architectures have gotten substantial testing, we should enable those and feature gate other architectures. I think both of those are potentially reasonable approaches. I'm not sure if we've had enough experience reports outside of x86 and ARM to do stabilization, but we should talk with the group about that.
Like how Core Arch isn't stable for all platforms?
Similar, but in this case, I think it's that there are architectures that have been added in terms of here are the safe registers to use, here are the things that need to be saved and restored around ASM and similar, and there may or may not have been enough testing to catch if there have been any obscure bugs there. There are also a handful of uses of assembly for things like the shader compiler stuff, which I suspect is not going to be stable anytime soon.
I think I'd be in favor of architecture by architecture. Could at least start that way, and it's easy enough to remove it if we decide.
Right.
This is probably in an RSC, so sorry, but what's our thing for different backends and inline assembly? Is it just magically going to work in CraneLift, no problem, or?
Not magically, but there is a defined way that CraneLift can handle this in terms of compiling this to a separate object file and linking it in. And that is an approach that the CraneLift folks can deal with. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. Long term, I sincerely hope that CraneLift itself adds inline assembly support. But in the meantime, there is a sufficient workaround, and it will be hardly the lowest performance aspect of doing CraneLift code generation, because that's really not the point of CraneLift. It's to generate code fast, not to generate fast code. So I wouldn't anticipate that being a problem.
Cool.
Josh, why don't you reach out to Manu and see if how they feel, and if you both agree, maybe prepare a stabilization report.
Will do.
I think we're going to say plan start with architecture by architecture, right?
Yes.
So meeting consensus. Okay, raw ref macros are stable. And with that, 30 minutes in, perfect timing, boom, we're done with the project group sync. So let's talk about upcoming meetings. We have some meeting proposals here. We have, how many weeks do we have?
3 before the next month.
Let's write the dates out. Be good to people, if you're not available, we'll want to know. But there's February 10, February 17. Hold on, I'm going to use ISO style dates.
Yay.
There was recently
Thank you.
a big thread about this on some Amazon internal mailing list, which amused me to no end. Okay, that's a good idea. They were right.
I was just trying to set our dates in a telemetry portal, and it was saying 2/2/2021, and I had no idea which one I was supposed to change.
So there's these, let's briefly go over these, I guess. Oh, come on, Markdown. What is happening? I don't understand this like Markdown thing in which sometimes you get these like double spaced lists. Like who even ever wants a double spaced list? I don't know. It's so weird. Oh, I'll note briefly that we had this meeting, but there's no minutes at all. Which is probably just fine, but it'd be nice if somebody either put like a dummy minutes or at least a link to like the recording and the, if we had one, or the Zulip thread or something, would be useful. I'm looking at you, Scott. Who's your meeting?
Yeah, sure. I felt like we didn't really get anything resolved in that one other than I should rewrite my
We didn't.
thing,
I agree with that
so I
assessment.
haven't been worrying about it too much.
It doesn't, like I said,
Yep.
just some token thing would be good. So we have improving trust in the Rust compiler, which is basically the, let's talk about what a spec might look like. And this ferrocene, nay sealed Rust proposal. I thought that Florian mentioned having a longer document or something, but maybe it's not in this meeting issue. There's
There was something
discussing,
attached
you mean in
to
here?
the email.
Oh, to the email. Maybe that was it. There's discussing the amount of oversight that Lang should have for lints. The possibility of denying. Sorry,
finish the list of things, and then I'll go back to talk about it.
Discussing the possibility of bare trade objects, and I just filed growing the team. It's kind of a placeholder, but I remember we were talking about wanting to have a meeting on this topic. Did you say you filed something, Scott?
I filed 72. It's probably not a full design meeting kind of a thing, but we're having things keep coming up of like, does Lang really deserve to, is Lang the appropriate people to make decisions on lints about usage of standard library APIs, for example? Which things is it worth us having to FCP them versus having some other team do it or something like that?
Yeah. So I guess I'd be curious if people would, in the compiler team, what we usually do is have people kind of vote on stuff they're excited about. If people want to just like throw some X's or something into the HackMD, that seems okay. Let's start with that.
So I can see that there's a couple of X's already showing up on the denying bear trade objects in 2021 edition. I'm wondering if that one needs a full design meeting, or there is currently a discussion going on the, we actually just talked about this yesterday. There was the, should we promote lints to deny that were edition lints? And that was one of them, and there's currently a PR. I'm wondering if we could just discuss that on thread, on the PR thread, and potentially do this via either FCP and checkboxes or concerns or similar. I'm not sure that we're going to gain a massive amount by having an hour-long design meeting going over this topic live, unless people think there's some specific point of dispute that we already know of that we should discuss.
I definitely agree that we shouldn't spend an hour on bear trade objects specifically. I don't know if it might be worth having one about all of the edition lints.
That actually sounds a lot more reasonable. If we want to just go down the list of lints in a full design meeting and take maybe 10 minutes on each one, and more likely in practice, 2 minutes on the ones nobody disagrees on and 45 minutes on the ones people do. But I think that would be a better use of time than just a meeting on one specific lint that hopefully we don't need 60 minutes to do.
Yeah,
I think-
I might also want to discuss the more broad policy rather than focusing on specific ones of whether we, like, I know Nico, I think yesterday we discussed in Lang meeting towards the end that there is sort of disagreement on whether we should enable warn by default for old lints
Right.
in 2015 and so forth, and that might be more useful for synchronous discussion than just going through a list of lints.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing, that I do want to settle that. I don't know what it's going to take to settle it. I could see it taking some discussion time.
Yeah, I think the things about the lints that we'd end up having more of a conversation about are things like the when is it okay to align lifetimes in paths, and there have been a bunch of back and forth about, like, okay, I think we all agree that lifetimes in outputs that are tied to input lifetimes should be visible, but I don't know. But there's been a bunch of things on the thread about, for the lint, about lifetimes in something like formatter in a debug, and whether seeing that lifetime is worth it, or if there's some different rule there that we'd be interested in.
So those sound like, I'm not sure if they're the same meeting or different meetings. They sound potentially like different meetings. Like a bit just for time reasons. But I'm thinking, Scott, that sounds potentially very useful. I feel like someone would have to do the legwork to prepare and summarize what are the concerns with each lint. And maybe I'm trying to think if there's any other, both summarizing the concerns and maybe, like, if relevant, creator results or something, if we wanted to get a sense of how much impact it has.
Yeah.
You think you'd be up for that?
I think I know some of them, so I can take a look at that. I wouldn't want this to be the next week or something, though. I got other things to do higher on my list.
I feel like that kind of has to happen if we're going to do this edition change.
Yeah.
So it seems like a useful thing to do.
Okay, I can take an action item to try and summarize some thoughts and options for the different lints.
So, like, proposed meeting is, so it's kind of edition lints overview. We would go for each idiom lint, summarize concerns that have been raised. Decide, I guess for each we're shooting for, ideally, we would decide whether to move forward or to make changes. at least preliminarily. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Sounds reasonable.
Do we think we want crater results? Does it affect your opinion to know how many crates get touched?
It probably depends on if we're tweaking rules and if they're on by default already. Like, I don't think I care about crater results for DIN trade because we've been warning about it for so long that if we're going to do it, we'll do it. And
Right.
if not, then not. But
Okay,
maybe
so
I
there's
think if
also
it's something
matter
that's
more.
already worn, yeah, if it's something that's already worn and we're just talking about moving it to deny, then it will have already broken anybody doing deny warnings. And anyone who isn't, we are moving from a warning to an error, but with cap lengths, we're still not going to break them.
That might depend on whether we go all the way to a hard error, because some of these, there's arguments for that.
Right, so that's what I was going to say is, if there's anything we want to consider going to a hard error on, then I would absolutely like a crater run. If it's something that's already a warn and we're talking about moving it to a deny, then we may or may not need a crater run depending on what the nature of it is and how difficult it is to fix. If it's just please add the word dine, then that may not be a critical issue.
So
Great.
it looks like we have, the one thing that's a little bit confusing to me is I was kind of expecting uniform treatment of the idiom lints. Like we say, these are the idiom lints, they're all warn or they're all deny or they're all whatever the same way across the edition. And it sounds like there's a little more of a piecemeal. This one might want to be that. So, which is potentially okay, but I would like that's how the, or maybe the way to think of it is there's a default setting and then there are some that we handle as a special case. They become a hard error for some reason that's particular to them or whatever. But I guess that would mean there would be summarizing the current state, the concerns that have been raised, and proposed action in 2021 edition.
I think it's fair to say that the default is probably that they go to deny by default, and concerns that that's too strong or not strong enough might exist to push some of them in a different direction.
That sounds correct to me.
I think they're already treated slightly differently now anyway, because they're not all warned by default, as I recall.
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to go review what Steve and I wrote in our draft RFC because I kind of forget. And I know we went back and forth on this, but that's fine.
Can I interrupt for a second? Are we really meant to spend this much time talking about this specific meeting topic? Like in terms of getting through the schedule and whatnot of what we're doing?
No, probably not.
I thought it was worth it because I think this is important.
Could
But I
close
think we
off this.
can move on and let's
Okay.
schedule it for the last day in February. This is my proposal. I'm going to just go ahead and say what I think we should do. I think we should consider doing, well, all right, let's say we put that last day in February. I was going to propose we do nothing on the 10th and schedule something for the 17th. But why did I want to say nothing on the 10th? Only because I want us to take, well, maybe what I want to do is use that as a working meeting to do some policy prep work. But
I was going to suggest the 10th might be a good day for the growing the team conversation, which seems like a good conversation to have sooner rather than later to try to get us some more bandwidth.
yeah, that's kind of compatible with my same general gist, if different.
Are there any like items to work on, like action items that you would want to do before such a meeting took place? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but
I would take an action item to prepare a document and some policy sort of stuff, but yeah, not super much. One question I have is that something we want to do closed? I think we should start it open. I'm not sure if we expect to go into talk about individuals, at which point I might want to close it to just existing members.
I would expect that if we're going, I mean, I think we could subdivide it in advance and say there is a portion of the meeting in which we are discussing the general process by which we want to grow the team, bringing on liaisons, giving them more responsibility, that kind of thing. And that should absolutely be done openly. But I do think we should discuss the potential people that we think would make either good liaisons or good team members or similar. And
Yeah.
that portion of the discussion should not be recorded.
Maybe we just want to do that because that'll probably take a while, and because I think the general process is still, unless anyone has any new ideas, I think the general process is that we're going to try to get people involved through liaisoning and shepherding ideas, and that's the pathway to membership, right? As we discussed in the past. That's my nomination. So is that agreeable? Any objections?
So the other meeting topics that are been on the proposal list above, we're just saying are not worth.
No, now the
Jumping into
question is, what do we do for the 17th? So we could do improving trust in the Rust compiler. We could do lint policy.
I don't think lint policy is important enough to over a meeting that someone asked us to do.
Agreed.
I agree. I would like to do it at some point. It doesn't seem urgent. It's the kind of meeting. I was going to say, I'd like to come into it with a policy too that we can pick apart, like as prep, but.
That's basically what I was going to say. Someone needs to write a straw man. We should do this. And
right.
Then.
So
the only thing I'll note is that if we want to schedule improving trust on the 17th, we should check with Florian at least. I don't know if he's planning to bring anyone else, but.
Yeah, I asked them about their availability. They didn't get back to me. I will check with Florian about it. I also want to, I'll also talk to him because I want to there's so much in that topic. I want to control the agenda or make sure we have an idea of what we're exactly going to talk about. But I guess in that sense, we have a few minutes here. If folks have thoughts on what they would like to discuss in this angle, then we could talk about it now. I don't know if people have given. I kind of feel not prepared to have that conversation because I don't have the list of all the things we could talk about in front of me or in my head. So I'm regretting having said it. I think we should not do it right now. But I would like to make that list with Florian. Okay, good. Let's not do it now. But
Yeah, in particular, I guess one thing that I might flag is that improving trust in the Rust compiler does not necessarily sound like a Lang team topic. So
yeah, the title is very generic.
Yeah, I think honestly the topic should probably be just the sealed Rust proposal or the new Ferrocene proposal.
A bunch of it seemed to talk about sort of stabilizing versioned mirror in some sense as a target that people can talk about and defining semantics for that, which
I think that
feels somewhat more Lang-y.
Compiler team,
but
it's Lang.
Mirror is Lang?
It's probably both. Absolutely, it's Lang. I mean, if we make a spec of what mirror means, and we have a spec, we have a.
I don't object to Lang
for a spec
being part of it. I'm just surprised it's immediately obvious that it's Lang. That's all.
I don't think this has anything to do with mirror as it's defined in the compiler. They just happen to share the same name. But there's a conceptual mirror, and then there's the compiler's implementation of that conceptual mirror, and they are closely related. But think of it like the JVM spec.
As I read the proposal, it was talking about defining Rust in a translation of the Surface syntax, defining the translation from the Surface syntax to the mirror, and then defining semantics on mirror and using that as the way the specification for Rust the language semantics would be written.
Okay, right. Okay, and that style of specification that it is, at least the Lang team
Yeah.
needs to be part of that.
That's right. I'm not saying the compiler team has nothing to do with it, just as they, but I think that's true of any Lang topic. I definitely think there is a side of it, like a tooling and so forth side, that is very compiler. That we have been discussing on.
Right, yeah, I guess my attitude is sort of like there's a way to architect things that Lang wouldn't have to be involved, but it's not necessarily what's being discussed here. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. There's a way of architecting it, but it wouldn't meet all the requirements of having semantics. Anyway, we can hash it out. I'm happy to loop in more of compiler too.
It's well, yeah. No, we wanted to get the details here. I guess what I'm objecting to is the idea that you couldn't have a different group that's dedicated to the semantics of mirror and of whatever this mirror is. And yeah, they want a Lang team liaison because you want to make sure it can express the things that Lang needs to express. But the idea that all of us need to be looped in on the design of that system doesn't sound right to me. Doesn't sound necessary.
There is a further discussion, I think, about that is Lang relevant, which is kind of how we want to treat a long-term stable version of the language like this and how that may affect the ecosystem. There's some discussion to be had there that may or may not be what the original intention of this meeting proposal was, but that is very much Lang, I think.
Now I'm thinking. I definitely, I don't know. I want to go to this brief policy thing. So I want to stop this conversation, but I want to continue it.
You can hash this out later.
Yeah, I want to think about it. It's plausible what you're saying. I do agree that probably all of us don't necessarily have to be there, but then again, that seems true for a lot of things.
Yeah, that's true too.
Something that Josh and I have been kicking around that ideally we'd probably have more time, but I wanted to at least float it, was thinking about how to handle concerns and objections and trying to make more of a policy around, I think there's a kind of informal rule, at least that I feel, which is sort of if I'm the only one raising an objection and nobody else seems to agree, even after we've really hashed it out, I probably should drop that objection, or else like I better be damn sure that I think it's important. And so we were thinking about how we can kind of formalize some of these rules with the idea of basically saying when you make a concern, to sustain that concern over an extended period of time requires a second from somebody else in the team and that second doesn't mean they think you're right, but it means they think we haven't had enough conversation about it yet. And they're not sure, or maybe they don't fully understand the point or don't feel confident they understand your point, something like that. And basically, if there is no second, we will move on. And a point that Josh raised, which I thought was really interesting, was that like this seems like a way of suppressing concerns, but actually it is also in its own way the opposite, because it kind of gives you the freedom to say you can raise any concern you want. Like you don't have to worry about the fact that you're raising a concern that other people might be annoyed about it or something, because there's sort of a mechanism for that, of saying, okay, well, if I'm the only one, fine, I'll let it go. But we're curious what people thought about this as a plan. Is this something we want to talk about in more depth?
And if you really care about a concern, it's your job to go out and garner support from people to second it, it sounds like.
Yes, I see it that way.
Right.
It reminds me a bit of other things we've talked about, like delegating or abstaining your votes on some things as well.
Yeah, that's another piece that I forgot, but I definitely want to add the ability, or I want to make more of a process that involves people writing a dissent. I mean, you can just make a comment, but I think it will be a fine mechanism to be able to say, I'm not blocking this, but for the record, I think it's a bad idea, and here's why, or whatever.
Right, like right now, that's just I didn't check my checkbox, or I checked it and sort of didn't say anything, or
Yeah, or I checked it and I wrote a comment, but it seems, I feel like it's not obviously appropriate right now to do that. It's a little weird.
yeah.
And if it was like, there was a mechanism. And
Reminds me of the +0 -0 Python thing, right?
Yeah, I would definitely give it the like disagree and commit sort of implication. In other words, you write the dissent, that's it. You know, that doesn't mean you get to keep saying that over and over all the time. Like the whole idea is, okay, we made the decision, we move on now.
Yeah.
I think one thing. Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it would also be interesting to see that, like, if we got 7 plus zeros on an RFC, that's also like would be good to notice that happened. Whereas right now a +0 is a indistinguishable checkbox.
That's a really good point.
Go, Mark.
I was going to note that I think the one concern I have with this policy is that I think making clear exactly how you raise a concern or objection is good. Right now, it's if you don't have an FCP bot going and it's sort of unclear, like, do I leave a comment? Do I, what is the process? And since there's a timer on it, it's sort of important that there's an explicit, date attached or whatever to it.
Yeah.
An interesting thought that maybe you can put a concern on a thing that doesn't have an FCP yet, in a way.
I would like that. I don't really like our, I mean, not like is the wrong thing. I think it is due for an update. Our RFC bot system. There's various problems and that are concerning to me.
I think it would be really cool to have those edited into the top comment or something. We sort of do this with checkboxes on a lot of tracking issues, but if we had a like, hey, this needs to get resolved, that is more obvious to anyone showing up on the tracking issue of like, no, this isn't ready for stabilization because blah. Maybe checkboxes in the top are good enough. I don't know if it needs the full like RFC bot tracking of it, but maybe.
I'm thinking about the mechanics now, exactly how this will work. In some ways, I'm less worried about the time limit, for example. Like I want this to be more of an understanding as much as anything that that we have on how we manage consensus, and it's not necessarily that it has to be like RFC bot says, whoop, nobody raised a second, I'm going to remove this concern, the timer has expired.
Yeah, I guess I bring it up mostly so that there's not an implicit, oh, I raised my concern, 10 days have passed, so I kind of feel like I have to withdraw it, and people are surprised that you raised a concern.
Right. I think I imagined it more like we're discussing the topic. You say, well, I won't agree because of X. And then the expected response is, well, does somebody second that concern? And, and we can kind of straw poll.
I was assuming you wouldn't have to withdraw it. It'd be like Supreme Court decisions where there's a dissent and it's still there, right? People know, like, just because the other side wins out doesn't mean the dissent's not registered anymore.
Right. In particular, I think that there's value in having a dissenting opinion. Like, here is for the record the concern that stands, and that concern may wish to be revisited when something is on its path to stabilization or has been implemented or similar, just as did that turn out to be an issue, etc. But that aside, while we could get in the habit of does anyone second, I actually think it would be less healthy for us to immediately call for seconds, because that implies that you must immediately rally whatever support you're going to get. and there's a tendency for people to commit to whatever position they start out with. I think it would be healthier if we do give people time to say, like, I have a concern. I'd like time to write up that concern and explain what the issue is and talk to people. And then at some later point, if you have had, once you've had the opportunity to do that, then you can find out if people accept or similar your concern.
To be clear, I totally agree. I didn't mean immediately. What I meant was more like we've had a long discussion and the net conclusion is somebody is, there's still like a holdout, and we can have the mechanism for saying, okay, like, well, it's clear that, you know, whatever, Nico doesn't like this idea, but does anyone second Nico's concern, or is that just Nico? And I would be okay with that. But I think we should stop here because we're at time. It seems obvious we should try to write this up in a more formal way and go, but I'm intrigued also by the RFC bot thoughts. I don't know. Nobody objects to the overall. I guess I'm not even going to ask. If, let me just say this, synchronously, if you object, right, ping, leave a comment somewhere or something if you object to the general concept. All right, thanks everyone. This was a good exercise, and we'll set up the calendar invites for the upcoming meetings. All right, ciao.
Hi.